episode 18 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slowinski.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we're playing and or making games. Show note, London. Keep those mail things, reader mail. I don't. Keep it coming. Just do it. Contact at BithelGames.com. That's contact at BithelGames.com. Mike, what are you playing?
Nothing. What are you playing?
I've been playing this avant-garde game. It's a simulation about startup costs and managing your life. And I'm hoping normal life starts kind of soon, and then I can play video games again.
So this is your ongoing fun and games moving to a new country. It's all good.
Yeah. No. It's almost done.
It's almost done. You got internet now?
I got internet, which apparently is shocking to many of our readers or listeners. Who
you guys so fast?
Apparently they're like, folks are like, it took me 6 weeks.
I think it's because you work very hard on the podcast to cultivate a very positive and friendly image. They've not seen you negotiate the way I've seen you negotiate. Alexander can get what he wants when he wants it.
But yeah, I've got internet now. I've got my 80 megabits per second. Which
is that good for you or bad for you, or
it's I mean, it is not great.
Okay.
Apparently if I had Virgin, I could get up
if you went fiber optic, yeah, that's what we are here.
Yeah, but apparently everyone else but Virgin is still like on the phone lines.
Mm-hmm. ADSL, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I got. I'm on Sky. Shout out to Sky. Any discounts thrown my way? I don't know. But
I'm sure they listen.
Yeah, I'm sure. Sky's listening to this. Yeah, I'm still trying to understand this whole, because there's this fundamental concept we keep skipping over, which is there's too much choice here, and it's really kind of blowing my mind. I'm really not used to this. So something
socialism,
like, sure, antitrust, whatever. So the thing, so for example, like you have now, okay, so you can get TV through the through a Netflix like provider called Now TV, which is part of Sky. Yes. But it's not cable, it's an app that you
it's like Netflix,
purchase.
Like you say, yeah. Or right, HBO Go or something like that.
Yeah, it's this like a la carte service. So I'm still trying to understand in like, should I get cable or should I get Now TV? And apparently I should get Now TV just because
it's only like, this is an advert for Sky now, but I think that is like literally £7 a month or whatever for all of your TV stations. But it's not as much. That's the thing. You're not getting your 200 channels of crap you're not going to watch anyway. You're getting just the stuff that you actually want to watch.
How dare you, sir? I want my 12 channels of football. That's what I want. I want to...
Well, you can get, so they have the sports package on Now TV, which will give you all of that football. That's a bit more expensive, though. But I don't think by the way, well done on localizing soccer to football. That's good.
Yeah. I'm working on it.
You're putting yourself into the shoes of the country. You're acclimatizing well. You're integrating.
Hey, listen, I've gotten so many flyers for candidates this week that I
what a waste of paper for them. What a waste of paper.
Like this is not the show for that.
Yeah.
But boy, I mean, I want to read all the stuff on these candidates because some of it is magical. I'm not used to this, really not. Like it's when in the States, because it's the whole like red state, blue state thing. Like you only get this stuff if you're like in a swing state where it actually matters. But I'm from Massachusetts. It's the bluest of the blue. No one spends money in Massachusetts. Like it's you toss one there on election day, maybe to be like, hey, show up at the polls. That'd be great. Thanks. But you know who's going to win. Like there's not really a question there. So having all this stuff of conservatives and Lib Dems and all these things.
I think your area as well might be more in play than a lot of other areas. Because I live in like Labour stronghold, like we've elected communists in this part of London, so like I'm super left in terms of where I live, so there's less here. But I think where you live, I think Greenwich maybe strikes me as a place where there would be a lot of Conservative and Labour voters for different reasons.
Well,
maybe?
I certainly got the Conservative flyer, which is what's the line? What's Teresa's line?
Strong and stable.
Strong and stable. There it is. Yeah. It's like the first words on there is just strong and stable. But then I've got something from the Lib Dems, and he's like 12 years old. It's magical. Like, I kind of want to vote for him just to
You might not. Do your research a little bit more. You might not want to. Anyway, as you say, this is not the right. show. Perhaps.
This is not the show for that. But yes, it is interesting receiving political flyers in the mail. I'll figure out some way to express this in the future. But yes, cable, politics, and adjusting to London. That's where we are right now. And now it's time for what's going on at the studio, and wanted to get a little bit existential this week, Mike.
Okay.
I wanted to sort of go with, sort of question, because we talk a lot about best practice, I guess, in this segment fairly often.
Or what we think is best practice.
Or what we think, and there it is. And right, that now you got it. Okay. What we think is best practice. So what I want to sort of just kind of touch on this week is no two studios are the same, and finding yourself can take a while.
I feel there should be some like American indie movie music playing under this kind of.
I was just about to say, you mean like Gosford Park, but no, that's not right.
No, I mean like Little Miss Sunshine's life of
Garden State. That's the one I'm thinking of.
And all that stuff.
A Zach Braffian soundtrack.
Yeah,
but no, I kind of wanted you. Well, you maybe. There is no one way of doing this. I don't even know if there's something worth exploring here, but other than to say, like, there's a lot of options. Like, we know
it's a lot. It's a lot like coming to Britain and trying to find a water company.
Okay,
that's it. There's just a lot of options. That's all I had. Yeah, I guess I think there are lots of different approaches. I think partially it's because lots of games companies have very different histories. So, like, some games companies are Nintendo's case, it's a playing card company that started looking at electronics goods and accidentally got very successful in them. For a lot of companies, games companies started as maybe film companies or general entertainment companies. What we're getting now is these kind of the second or third generation studios like ours. I think you could very easily go, the history of us as a Bithell Games is, you can go back to the Oliver twins, who were two indie developers back in the 80s who did their own thing and then worked with Codemasters and got successful enough that they started their own big company, and then I worked at that big company and I got ideas about how I'd like to do things differently. So you've got this kind of DNA kind of working its way through, everyone reacting and changing and messing around with it. Honestly, I think it's because we're still a very young industry and the right way has not emerged yet. Would you say that?
Yes. I mean, one of the consistent themes on the show, and it is consistent across the industry, is the lack of standardization. There's what we think is best practices based on general business knowledge, which is based on other industries. I don't know if I've ever actually really talked about this on the show, but yes, in business school, the focus of business school is manufacturing and service-based industries.
Yeah.
It is, there is a lot of practice in that, hundreds of years of practice in that, and
there are right answers, right?
There are right answers.
If you want to sell paper, there's a very logical, straightforward process by which you should probably do that, right?
I mean, like, if I wanted to run a fish and chip shop here, there is a very practical, like, follow the, like, paint by numbers,
catch a fish,
right? Put it in newspaper.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, batter.
You've missed like several key steps there.
I've missed
You're a fishmonger. You've gotten confused. You've fallen the very first hurdle of running a fish and chip shop. Cook the fish.
But yeah, there's a lot of back end stuff, that customers never see. But it's known. If I want to run a shop on High Street, which is becoming more and more difficult these days, as far as I understand, there is a very direct route to doing that, and that doesn't exist in games. Like even by the way things shift. I mean, one
consumption shifts as well, right? Like the way the player actually finds and plays video games moves so quickly as well. I remember that I was around pre-patching. I remember when you made a game and you shipped a game, and if there was a bug in it, tough. Like that, as it just seems so alien now. That was back when video games were more akin to like a general manufacturing process. You made a thing and then you had to sell it. Like it was.
Well, and emotionally, you prefer that style of game as well. And so does a huge portion of the audience, right? Which is make a game, have it be finished, and then put that out there so that, But
I mean, even without patches, even with your kind of standard kind of traditional game of like, it's a finished game, there's still, I'm still getting my Prey update is downloading as we record the podcast, right? And it's not that they're adding new exciting content to the game, it's that they're fixing stuff.
Right. Well, like one of the interesting stories this week is apparently Witcher 3 sold more copies like this quarter than it had in the same quarter last year, and that has been like due to Witcher 3 and CD Projekt Red are certainly, CD Projekt Red is certainly a company known for consistently supporting its a project that would be done and shipped for a long period of time.
Where they're more of a service company than a manufacturing company, to use your business school analogy, right?
Right, and software as a service is we're certainly used to that with products like Slack is a great example of if you're general communications, but there's any company that you sort of uses the cloud, if in business terminology is called SaaS, software as a service company. And I think a lot of that also springs from business folks, MBAs and that sort, trying to find, okay, so there's this software thing. How do we make it fit concepts that we understand and that we can derive more consistent revenue from? Because otherwise, in that sort of traditional way, the industry is, and it continues to be, a hits driven business, and you can't really figure out risk in a hits driven business, where you can figure out risk and loss and everything like that in a manufacturing or service industry. So going back to the whole entire manufacturing and service is something. Tech is still really new in business schools. Like forget games. Like games is still genuinely like avant-garde.
It's not a business, it's a hobby where you occasionally get paid.
Yeah,
as far as they're concerned, right?
But it's completely avant-garde. No one, professors don't understand how it works. Like even those of us who are like in industry have a strong sense, and even the folks listening to the show, right? Like we have a strong sense of games that will perform well or won't, or and certainly hindsight is 2020. Like once a game is out there, and should this game get a sequel or should it not? Like we have a pretty good track record at that point of knowing what's going to work and what isn't. But in terms of like knowing that something like Battlegrounds, right, or Stardew Valley, or anything like these games that sort of come out of nowhere, that are not from massive corporations, right? Like,
but I think you can. I do think you can predict both of those. I do think there is a certain element of predictability with this, and obviously all of this is soothsaying and nothing's 100%. But you can definitely look at something like Battlegrounds and see those kind of games and mods doing well over the last few years, and see, the Battle Royale style structure kind of growing in popularity in other games. And of course, with Chucklefish, they did have a very successful previous game, right? So I agree with you to an extent. Maybe it's just those examples, but there is, I think we're learning how to see those hits coming better and better as well over time, because I think it did used to be that in much the same way as the film industry, where, is Activision publishing it? That's probably a good sign that it'll do well. You know what I mean? Well, and I think that's not true anymore. I think there's more routes to success than there used to be.
And Activision is actually an amazing example of a company that if you wanted to think of the Disney of video games,
yeah.
Activision is certainly it. Like that sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe that Disney now has and now crafts. A lot of that you can, it's not the same, but that sort of attention to detail and full blown ecosystem marketing, community thinking goes into the projects that we see from Activision. Like they don't just ship a game with some marketing behind it. They ship an entire concept.
I do wonder with Activision if some of that is us putting that, and themselves put, like, I've seen like talks from them and stuff where they talk about this stuff, and I do wonder sometimes if it's an explanation, because they've obviously had some mega hits, but I'm not entirely sure that's as well planned out as they sometimes present it, because it's definitely the tent poles are there, right? The Blizzard stuff that always does incredibly well, Call of Duty, but Activision also, definitely has lesser projects that come out, right? So I don't know, I sometimes think Activision presents themselves very well as being very thoughtful and clever, but maybe the track record doesn't quite speak to that in the same way as, there is yet to be a not good Marvel film, right? It's that kind of thing. Whereas Activision, they definitely do, ship products that don't do as well as others. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So yeah, finding yourself. I don't know. I don't know where I was. Didn't really have a thesis for this one.
I think if there is a thesis, it's that if you're listening to this and you're listening to us for advice and thoughts on how games companies should do their jobs, try and find other people to listen to as well. Because we're going to have an opinion, we're going to have a perspective, and hopefully it's one that's interesting.
It's going to be a scrappier perspective than someone that's got like...
And less scrappy than other people, right? Like there's an element here where I think you should shop around for opinions. It's something that I really do try and emphasize when I do talks and panels and stuff at events, or when I do blog posts, or whenever I'm talking, I'm always very conscious of saying, like, this is one dude's opinion, and I think I'm informed. I think I'm relatively intelligent on the subject I'm speaking on. But, like, at the same time, it's not about intelligence. It's about experience and place in the business and what you've been doing and what you're planning to do. So, yeah, if you're listening to this show for advice, which I don't know why you'd listen to it otherwise, except our, sultry voices, obviously, find other places as well. It's interesting. I've actually talked to a lot of people. I've started asking people who listen to the podcast questions when I meet them at events. And it's funny how often people listen to us as one of several developer podcasts they listen to, and actually maybe listen to more developer podcasts than gamer podcasts. And it's interesting that I think this podcast works well when you listen to it with other shows. I guess that's what I'm saying. I think we can contribute, but I think we should be part of a healthy and balanced diet.
How dare you?
1, 2, 3. I want to thank you for reading the freedom mail again. Boom, 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 boom. Thank you for reading the freedom mail again. Boom, 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 boom.
Hey, Mike and Alexander. How do you feel about game dev hub cities? Do you think they're important for developers? Should developers try to focus on being or going to one? Or is development decentralized enough that they're not important anymore? Thanks, Oleg B.
I think they serve a purpose, don't they? I think any kind of community serves a purpose. Being able to access other people who are going through the same challenges as you. Getting opinions, getting advice. The stuff we talked about in the previous segment of kind of getting some different worldviews is always useful.
In terms of decentralized, I don't think that's I think that's going along well. I think if if you're talented, especially if you've worked in industry for a little bit and then you decide, hey, I want to move to someplace else and go freelance and have the opportunity to pick something up, it is a challenge. Freelancing is incredible. Freelancing is the full-time job on top of whatever jobs you get. Like, it is a lot of work to freelance. But this idea of game dev city, of hub cities, I lived in Boston, and there was a period of time there where it looked like Boston was going to become a major development city. It was gearing up. It was on the verge of having the type of tax incentives that we've seen in Canadian cities that have sort of become legitimate mega hubs. But then there was an incident with a company called 38 Studios down in Rhode Island, and that sent that sent a chilling effect, not just to Massachusetts, but to other states as well. And it sort of became this it became this thing of like, I don't know, think of any fantasy show where like someone's holding up the head of their enemy, as a warning to others. And that's kind of what 38 Studios became, because it was so high profile, and there was this government sort of connection to it. And, it was this particularly small state where something like 75 million is a lot of money. And that had this chilling effect. And you saw a city like Boston that, was an hour away, start to deflate, I would guess. Like there was definitely this thing that was happening with Harmonix and Irrational and other studios in that area where there was investment, there was building things up. And of course, the thing about having these hub cities is that the best part of those hub cities is after a period of time, you have a group of individuals who know enough or want to break off, and then they start their smaller little indie studios and doing that type of stuff, and then they can grow that up, and that's how you get these sort of hub communities. And that, over the last 10 years, the way I've spoken in the past about how, London, and England itself used to be a major hub of development, collapsed, just completely left the top 10. Yeah. And, and now it's crawling itself back. But
I'm maybe a bit more optimistic about that than you. I think we're doing pretty well. I think London is massively on the rise, especially if you broaden the definitions to include your mobile games, that kind of stuff, the stuff that's doing financially well globally right now. London's doing well in the UK at large.
No, it's getting back, but we can't deny that there was a solid 10 years where it was punched in the face.
I still remember the joke. I remember there's a if you're British, you've probably seen this. There's a magazine called Develop Magazine, which is the developers magazine over here. And I still remember the cover. I'd been in industry for 2 or 3 months, and it was when the Canadian tax breaks were introduced. And the cover of Develop Magazine was a door with light spilling into a darkened room, and the caption was, "Would the last developer to leave the UK please turn the light off?" And that was the prevailing kind of wisdom. For me, I think hubs are great. They're great for a social perspective. They're great to meet people. I don't get involved as much in the London game scene as I probably should, because I don't like people. I like to to work.
Well, that's going to become my thing, right?
That's going to be more your thing.
That is absolutely going to be my thing, and I'm looking
stuff.
Forward to that.
But it's still relevant. It's still relevant. There's one we joke about. There was one dinner. It was some people were listening. Maybe we were even there. It was, I think, about 20 game developers went to a pub. This was about 5-6 years ago in London, and it was called I'm Not Going to GDC or something like that. And it was basically a bunch of developers who couldn't afford to go to GDC. And around that table were, now people who are much better known and much, and are like big London game dev names. And it was the night we all met each other. And it was the night that I met a bunch of people that I've since worked with, people I'm working with now. And it's one of those specific one night in London as a hub city defined, you know, some great friendships, but also working relationships that have, you know, defined how we do things. That's where I met Roper, for example, who works on our last game. It's where I met some of the people I'm working with on the current kind of little hobby project thing we're doing. These moments happen and you don't realize at the time. You know, you're sat having drinks in a bar with someone, or, you know, somewhere that's not serving alcoholic beverages. Those exist as well. And you don't realize that that's going to be the conversation that defines the next 5 years of your career. And that's what you get when there is a concentration of people in one place. All of that said, there are lots of reasons people don't live in these hub cities, and I think that it is getting easier to not do that. It is getting easier thanks to the internet, thanks to social media. It is getting easier to not have to be physically present. You can still be, you're not a part of the indie scene if you're not in a city where there are other indies. That's nonsense. So I think while it's a positive, I come down somewhere in the middle. I think you can be outside of that hub if you want to be, or if for, you know, various personal reasons you have to be.
Yeah, I think being part of a hub city lubricates the ease of meeting other folks. Don't make faces like that.
Greases the wheel.
Greases the wheel, yes.
Yeah. Lubricates the ease.
Yeah.
It's my least favorite Power Rangers movie.
Lubricates the ease?
Wasn't there a... Was it... Oh, no, it was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, wasn't it? Where it was something of, like, the doom of the ooze or something, or the... Can't remember. But, yeah, anyway, carry on.
The secret of the ooze.
Secret of the ooze, there you go. Yeah, the lubrication of the ease.
But it does make a difference being in... you know, classically in the games industry in the States, it's being in San Francisco, you know, or Los Angeles. And I guess that's certainly easier for, you know, major sort of, like, if major publisher kind of situations. But then I guess there are indie sort of hubs. I think, you know, Austin is an example of
Austin's got a really cool indie scene. I think that's the other thing as well worth remembering, depending on where you're at in terms of recruitment. This stuff becomes important, you know, in the position we're at now, where we're, you know, hiring people, working with people. I know I can find people in London who can do any job that we have a need for. I know that there is an industry here that I can kind of bring in staff from. And that's super localized. You know, I live in East London, so I'm 10 minutes away from most of the tech jobs in the UK. You know, so there is all of these opportunities to grab people who have those skill sets, and that's relevant. You know, if you're at a stage where you are hiring people and filling an office with team members, location is mega important. So, you know, being there from the start does make sense.
So, to answer, you know, how do you feel about game dev hub cities? Do you think they're important for developers? It's complicated, but yeah,
it's probably a plus.
It doesn't hurt.
It definitely doesn't hurt.
And should developers try to focus on being or going to one, or is development decentralized enough that they're not important anymore? They're certainly still important.
They're still important because it's not like you don't visit one for a weekend. It would be living there. You've got to live somewhere in your country that you live in, so might as well live somewhere where there are other devs. But, you know, there are lots of reasons not to. I'm a good example of this. My partner works in industry where she can really realistically only work in 2 or 3 cities in the UK. Fortunately, those are cities where there are game hubs, but if there weren't, that would be a reason for me not to live in a game hub, would be so my partner can work. You know, there's lots of other reasons why you would not want to live in a hub. So, but if there's nothing, if you're choosing, I want to move somewhere, move somewhere where there's other devs. That's probably going to help.
And I certainly wouldn't mind if Mike's partner decided to move to one of those other places, because I'd be paying about £1,000 less on rent. So it does make an economic difference in terms of, you know, when you go to one of these major cities, they cost a lot more than going to these other places. And that's why you know, there's that thing we've talked about where if you've had a major job at a major studio for a while and want to do the freelance thing and move to the country, it's a good show, by the way, move to the country, as long as you've got a good internet sort of connection, yeah, you can live out there, live reasonably. And
lots of devs live on farms, and it was a stereotype in the 90s. I mean, now definitely there are indies. I mean, Dan Marshall is always posting up images of the cattle outside his window, but it was a stereotype in the 90s that most of the big British games companies, few of which are still around thanks to the Canadian cull that you talked about, most of those companies were converted farms or out in the Midlands somewhere, where, you know, not near the city, because no one wanted to set up a studio in London because it was way too expensive.
The costs were astronomical. I mean, like the costs are not. The funny thing I've had to explain several times since moving here is that, yes, London is expensive, but because of the exchange rate and all the sort of political things that have happened, it's really not that different than your New Yorks or your San Franciscos or something along those lines. We're not talking about a city that, you know, even just a couple years ago was astronomically higher than...
Well, yeah, I mean, I travel to America and it feels like, and I'm always in the cities for events and stuff, and generally it feels like it's a bit cheaper actually in the cities than...
It is now.
I think my money goes a bit further in New York or San Francisco than it does in London. But yeah, no, the stereotype of being out in the wilderness, I mean, that got to such a point. There's an episode of Black Mirror about a games company that was in the most recent series of Black Mirror, and it's in an old converted house, and everyone who's ever worked in the games industry in the UK goes, oh yeah, that's how it is or was.
And being out in the middle of the country, you know, the costs weren't astronomical, and still all of these bad things happened, right?
Well, that's how Guildford happened as a hub. I mean, Guildford's not in the country. Guildford obviously is an impressive city. But a part of the reason that the Guildford...
That's where Lionhead was, right?
It's where Lionhead was. Okay. It's where a bunch of other stuff... Oh, it's weird to talk about Lionhead in the past tense.
Right.
But now you have an enormous kind of scene in Guildford. But that was because Guildford was about as close as you could get to London before the prices went crazy up. You know, and that was, you know, so it's I mean, there's arguments in all directions. The other thing, of course, to remember is there's far more game developers than there used to be, and they're far more dispersed than they used to be. In the UK, you would be hard pressed to find a city where there wasn't a small indie game scene. I know in the US, obviously, the distances are greater. I'm sure that's, you know, not true. But in the UK, at least, you're never that far away from a hub.
If you've got a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@BithelGames.com. That's contact@BithelGames.com, through the YouTube comments of this show, or on Twitter by pinging @MikeBithell or @Slewinski. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide reviews and 5 stars on iTunes, likes and subscribes on the YouTubes, and positive reinforcement on whatever other platforms you're hearing this show on whenever possible. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We'll be back next week. I'm Alexander Slewinski. Thanks again, and get in the last word, Mike.
Widows.